Hello and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran frantically applying for a paycheck protection loan, or else a scrappy upstart frantically soliciting donations on your SoundCloud page, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey you guys, it's the first Friday of May 2020, and I'm glad that you're here. Thanks for joining us. This week's show, I can't get that into my mind, is brought to you by Bandzoogle, built by musicians and for musicians. Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay a web developer to get a website made, and a web developer was always some guy named Pierre who drove a Pontiac Aztek with a sound system that was always bumping MC Chris. And old Pierre would make you a website that could only toggle between Times New Roman and the Halloween Chiller font. And old Pierre would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. We don't have to deal with web developers anymore. We have Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. Everything's already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates. You can sell your merch. They have mailing list tools, social media integrations. You can crowdfund commission free. It's a fantastic service. So, the Working Songwriter Podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Thank you, Bandzoogle. If you guys would like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, I will be live streaming every Sunday night at 9 p.m. over at my YouTube page. This Sunday, I'll be playing the entirety of my album Windfall, along with some requests and some audience Q&A at the end. So head on over to YouTube, type in my name, and subscribe to check out those shows. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, viable even in the age of coronavirus, when I can't tour anymore, it would really help if you would become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you love and find meaningful. You head over to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. If just about 1% of our listenership kicked in a few bucks per month, it would make an enormous difference for me, and it would certainly make this show continue to be a viable endeavor. So thank you for all of you who have done that. If you haven't done that because you're financially insecure these days, and plenty of people are, I totally get that, and I'll be here for free for you every week. It would help, though, if you would write a review for us in the iTunes store or mention the show to a friend. And both of those things are free. The simple math on those is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. I'll end the harassment there. This week's episode is more casual than most. I mean, I've known BJ for over a decade, beginning when I was the first band of like 6 bands at the Lincoln Theater in Raleigh on tour. It was like a tour that I had booked myself, and American Aquarium was headlining. BJ and I have remained friends ever since, and as you'll hear, we speak on the phone together often, so this episode really did feel like just catching up with a good friend. So I hope you enjoy it. Born in 1984 in Greensboro, North Carolina, and raised in the small adjoining town of Reedsville, Our guest this week is BJ Barham, the writer and the force of nature behind the country rock outfit American Aquarium. After leaving college at North Carolina State, BJ founded the band in 2006, using the opening lyric from Wilco's iconic "I Am Trying to Break Your Heart" as a moniker. The band has maintained a live schedule over the last decade and a half that could stand toe-to-toe with any comer, logging 250 to 300 shows annually. Of their schedule, the now sober journeyman once quipped to American songwriter, "I'm not bragging that I'm made for driving long distances, not sleeping and abusing substances. That's nothing to be proud of, but it's what we're all good at." In 2012, after years of work with little to show, the band hired a then relatively unknown Jason Isbell to produce what was slated to be their farewell album in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Their choice of a producer proved to be auspicious, and the record breathed new wind into their sails. Their latest album, Things Change, has been BJ's most successful record to date. Saving Country Music has said of their last album, American Aquarium have finally found their sound, their voice, and released arguably the best record of the band's run, and maybe one of the best of 2018. Vice has deemed his songwriting country storytelling at its finest, and No Depression has written that his songs are always personal and genuine, teeming with the dark realism of lost hope. BJ caught up with me on the phone last week from his home in North Carolina. BJ, welcome back to the show. It's been a long time since we've had you on, and I'd say a few things have changed for you since I interviewed you in a Charlotte hotel room with Whit Wright and the gang there hanging out. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. Stir crazy, but we're happy, we're healthy. So considering the alternatives, I'll take staying inside.
Indeed. Well, we're healthy here too, so thank God for that. Well, let's dive into it. I want to. Last time I interviewed you, you had been on the road for years with a band that you'd had together for about a decade, and then a couple months after we did the interview, that all changed. Can you talk about how the transition went down with your old band to your new situation now?
Yeah, I had the same band, give or take a few members, from 2010 all the way up to 2017. We were kind of that was the version of the band that so many people remember. A lot of people got on board with, Burn, Flicker, Die and Wolves, and that was the core of that band. And then in February of 2017, every member of the band came to me one by one and told me that they did not want to play music with me anymore. That's a weird thing. There's no handbook for that. There's no online bands in town special handbook that I can pay $19.95 for that teaches me how to overcome that. Band turnover has been relatively tumultuous through my entire career, but I'd finally started settling into the comforts of having the same core members of the band. And so here in 2017, I'm, making that decision on, okay, do I move forward solo? Do I take some time off the road? Do I put together another band and go with American Aquarium, this thing that I've built? And I decided on the latter. I decided that I started American Aquarium back in 2005. I've had almost 40 members in the band over these 15 years. American Aquarium, I didn't start out that way, but American Aquarium quickly turned into a vessel for just my songwriting. And so I had the internal dialogue with myself of, as long as I'm willing to play these songs every night and sing these songs, I have the right to keep going as American Aquarium. I started the band, I built the band, and I'm not taking away anything anybody added over the years. But as long as I'm playing the songs and playing the music, I feel very comfortable playing under the moniker of American Aquarium. And so, here we are, February 2017. I have no band. And so I did what a lot of people do as midlife crises. I didn't go to work for a while, and I just got in the car with my wife, and I drove around the country playing shows solo. I did a thing called the Great 48 Tour the summer of 2017, just to kind of get my head back on and kind of fall back in love with my songs. And I spent almost 3 months, me and my wife, on the road. I played at least one show in all 48 lower U.S. states, and just kind of fell back in love with it. I got off the road in July, and then in August I put a new band together and moved forward.
Can you talk about the process of putting that band together? I mean, it had been 7 years since you'd had to hire everybody, then you had to start with a blank slate. How did you do that process?
Man, I got really lucky. There was a friend of mine from Lubbock, Texas, named Joey Bobby. He was the drummer during that Things Change session. And he kind of came to an acoustic show on that Great 48 and was like, "Hey man, what do you think about me putting a band together to back you?" And I was like, "Man, that would really help me out a lot, because I've kind of milked my resources as far as Raleigh goes, which is where we're based." And so he put together pretty much the core unit that would later go on to be the Things Change band, which was Ben Hussey on bass guitar, Shane Baker on lead guitar, and I told him that Whit actually found me a pedal steel player named Adam Kurtz, who I brought to the table, and then we started touring together. We started touring as a 5-piece, and we picked right back up where American Aquarium, version 11.0 had left off, and here was 12.0. We just got back on the road and started playing songs, and there were some people that kind of were so attached to that older band that they couldn't make that transition with me. They looked at American Aquarium as this certain version of the band, and I totally get that. There's plenty of bands that I really love certain iterations of, and they kind of left the table. But as soon as they left the table, it made room for newer folks to come to the table and fall back in love with these songs and fall back in love with the new band. And we went into the studio, and so I guess the band got together in August of 2017. We went to the studio in December of 2017 to record Things Change with John Fulbright out in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, you guys did that at the Hanson studio, right?
Yeah. We were originally planning, when we booked the session, we were going to do it at Leon Russell's old place, the church, which was at the time going through this massive, multi-million-dollar renovation. But it was supposed to be done in December. It didn't get done in December, so we had to kind of pivot. And luckily, John Fulbright, the Tulsa music scene being as tight-knit as it is, Fulbright knew the Hanson guys, and the Hanson guys were out supporting a Christmas tour or Christmas record. And so they just basically gave us their compound for a couple weeks, and it's this amazing. It's exactly what you think a studio built by 3 kids that have been in the music business since they were, 10 years old, who properly invested their money after number one hit after number one hit. They're still doing it. They have this amazing creative epicenter in the Brady Art District in downtown Tulsa. And it's this really kind of unreal studio with all this really great gear. And they kind of just gave it to us and said, "Hey, make a record here." And so we holed up there for 2 weeks, and we cut that record, Things Change.
Man, that's great. I with going from the old band to a new iteration of the band, it really makes me think it's tough when you have a band which is basically, like you said, the band from the start was a vessel for your songs, and there was people coming along adding to that. So if you're not a band like the Beatles, where everyone has like an equal share or something like that, but you're a band where there's a songwriter that has guys coming into play, it's really tough because the incentive structure starts to change for everybody in their early 30s, because people get married, people start having kids, people start needing more money to come in the door, they start needing to be able to choose when they tour and don't tour. You see a lot of bands that were built like yours kind of fall apart at that age when guys hit their early 30s. Have you noticed that in the past with other bands?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's plenty of bands. There's a lot of really great bands that, once somebody gets their wife pregnant or gets a wife or buys a house or undergoes any of these major changes we see people start making in their 30s, it affects the band dynamic. It affects the band structure. And we were no different. All of the guys that quit the band, we were all around the same age. We were in our early to mid 30s. And I always make the analogy of a tree. Like, we all started on the same, root system. And then as the tree kept growing, we looked up, and 7 years later, those branches had grown very, very far apart. What we thought was important in life had changed. That definition of what was the most important thing in our life had all changed. And I was really the only one whose main goal was American Aquarium. And so those guys walked away. I don't think a lot of it was too much bad will. It was just they had served their time. They had done that thing in their 20s where they were in a band, and now they were moving forward. There's only one of the guys still playing music, and that's Whit. Whit still plays steel. He moved to Nashville and became an extremely in-demand pedal steel player, which I knew that was going to happen from the start. I was lucky to keep him in my band for 6 or 7 years. But everybody else kind of moved forward and got different jobs. There's a guy who, one of our old members, manages a gym. One of them writes code for an IT firm. The band was very much a thing of their 20s. And for me, I'm a lifer. Me and you have had this conversation.
Yeah.
This is what I do. And so when presented with a kind of a career altering decision like that, like, hey, your entire band quit, what are you going to do? My only option was to adapt and move forward. I didn't have, I'm a shitty bartender. I'm a really shitty server. The only thing I've ever been able to do is write songs and drive very long distances in 15-passenger vans.
Yeah. And I can only imagine how bad you'd be at coding. So,
Oh, horrible. Absolutely. I can barely upload a new header photo to my Facebook page, yet alone build it out. So I'm excited that songwriting has been good to me.
And it makes sense for someone like Whit, the pedal steel player that stayed in it. If I was an instrumentalist who decided that this was going to be something beyond what I did in my 20s, this was going to be my life's work, that would be my move too. I'd be like, man, I can't just count on one band. I have to move to Nashville where everybody is, and I have to play for a lot of people. And I got to be doing session stuff. I got to pick up different tours here and there. You got to make yourself more flexible so that you're not just at the whims of a single band and when they want to tour or not tour,
Exactly. And that's why, I think that's one of the main reasons Whit is one of the few guys from that old iteration of the band that I still stay in touch with on a regular basis. Is because there was no animosity there. There was no ill will. It was just the next logical step for him as a musician. And he's still doing it, and it wasn't one of those things where, he did it because he didn't like me. Like me and he, if I'm in Nashville, I go over to his house and have dinner with him and his wife, and they were just here a couple months ago and had dinner at my house. He's still one of my favorite human beings and one of my dearest friends, one of my longest running friends. And, it just made sense when you're a multi-instrumentalist, a talented multi-instrumentalist. You can't base yourself out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and pick up all the really great session gigs. But moving to like an epicenter like Nashville, where every single day you can pick up at one, maybe two gigs, to where you're going into a different studio for the morning session and then driving across town for the afternoon session. I think that's where he really found his calling. And he's also gotten a lot more into like his instrumental stuff. So he's got a record coming out of just instrumental songs on the pedal steel. He's a real talented human being. And, like I said, I don't think it's a coincidence that he's the one person that I've really stayed close with.
Yeah. The longest iteration of my band that I had was two guys, Matt and Greg, electric guitar player and bass player respectively. And, after about 5 years, we hit the end of a touring cycle. It was 2015, and we toured over 200 dates that year. It was the most I'd ever done. For you, that was kind of a light year. I understand that. Basically, we hit the end of the year, and I had broken even at the end of the year, and I just ended up in a place, with my own home life where, my wife and my partner was just like, cool, man, I've been by your side for 8 years while you're doing this. Is there ever going to be a point where you're not just breaking even. It was like, wow. So I went to both those guys and just said, look, I'm not going to have any work for 12 to 18 months. And, it wasn't really me firing them. It wasn't really them quitting. It was just like, look, this thing that we were doing, this is unsustainable right now. And this is ending right now. And it's too bad. And I wish that it would have worked, but it didn't. And things, I think it's really rare to find creative partnerships that can both stay fertile creatively and also pay everybody's bills at the end of the day.
For sure. Toward the end of our, when we all started out, once you make the songwriter share and then the performer share, it's really easy to split up $0 at the end of the day. But once you move through your career and you start getting a little bit of traction and songs start getting placed in TV shows and you actually start seeing Spotify revenue, when those shares start getting split up, that's where, some animosity comes from. And they're like, well, I played on this record too. And then you have to explain to people, it's like, well, I wrote the song. And so therefore I'm entitled to this. And this is what you're entitled to. That's always an awkward conversation to have. And luckily some bands aren't bands long enough to ever have that conversation. And some bands turn over so quick, the big thing now is, work for hire in the studio. Like you just pay somebody, come in, play on your record. You give them a check at the end of the session and you shake their hand and tell them thank you. But for me, I've always recorded my records with the road band. And so there's pluses and negatives to that. And toward the end of, a 7-year run with the same band, once the band started getting traction, I think they got, a little bit more like, I've been here just as long as this guy. Why are you getting paid this? And why am I getting paid this? And why is this guy getting paid this? And so the only positive thing that comes out of everybody quitting at once is you get to completely restructure your business. You get to completely restructure the hierarchy of the band, and you get to explain to every single person coming in the door from here on out, this is what it is. I don't want you to have any kind of false notion on what you're getting into. This is exactly what you'll get paid every single show, no matter if 0 people show up or if 8,000 people show up. This is what you're walking home with. This is how we do song structures and how we split it up in the studio. And if you want to be a part of this thing, awesome. If you don't want to be a part of this thing, it's okay. I used to get my feelings hurt when somebody quit the band. I used to take it extremely personal. And nowadays I don't take it personal anymore. I just realize that growth and change is something that every small business has to go through. And being in a band is no different than that. There's going to be these moments of really great chemistry and really great creativity, really great energy in the room. And then that will run out and some people will leave and they will be replaced by other people that are excited to be there and creative. And so as long as you can surround yourself with people that actually want to be there with you, I think that's the key to keeping a band together for, in my case, going on 16 years.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And like you said, just being up front with people about the structure of it. The last record I did was the first one that I did totally, as you said, like pay for hire with guys. So what's interesting about that, it's kind of a trade-off because, so on the one hand, it's much more expensive to make a record that way because since it's pay for hire and the guys know that there's going to be no back end, their hourly and daily rate is pretty astronomical. But that being said, there's no hard feelings. They know that they're getting that rate. Like you said, whether 0 people show up or 8,000 people show up, they get paid the same. And the same with, I'm the one taking the risk. I'm going to put this record out myself. If I sell 100 copies, I'm in trouble and you did fine. And if I sell 100,000 copies, I'm digging a pool in my backyard and you got paid the same too. It's a risk reward type deal.
Exactly. Like it's the same, and that's hard to explain to folks, because everybody, when you think of bands, you think about like 5 lifelong friends who met in middle school and went on to take on the world. And that's just not how it really is. It's like, as much as VH1 wants to tell us about how every band started in an elementary school parking lot over their love of the Clash, that's not how every band forms. And, at the end of the day, especially a guy like me who's a songwriter who surrounds himself with musicians, At the end of the day, I'm the one paying. At the end of the day, everyone's hands out, and I'm paying for mixing and mastering and recording and band shares. No one else has to take that risk. So yeah, if the record does well, I expect to be rewarded for taking all of that risk on my own. Early in the band, I used to keep the same guys around. I would offer kind of shares of the band. I would offer higher percentages of touring revenue and stuff like that. And then, once everybody walked away from that, I was able to restructure and, just pay everybody I pay everybody a little bit more than standard Nashville rates for touring and for studio time. And so that way I can tell them, like, man, I'm paying you more than, most bands would pay you if you went on the road with them. I'm paying you more to be in the studio with me because at the end of the day, I want to keep a tight unit together. But I'm not going to beg anybody to play with me. I'm not going to beg anybody, to be in my band or give up things that I think are important to keep somebody here. If 15 years in this business has taught me anything, it's, know your worth, and don't let anybody else take that from you. And, sometimes it feels heartless, and sometimes it feels like it's great because the band I have now, I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about the old band, but the band I have now is just, everybody is happy to be here. They know exactly what's expected of them. And it's so nice to be in a situation where these roles are defined to the finest print. And everyone's just, plays their part and is really, really excited to be here.
Sure. And in some ways, at that point, your business kind of becomes a springboard for people. Like, I've hired people in the past where I do a show or two with them and I'm like, wow, you are so talented that there's no way you're staying in my band for a long time. I'll be a springboard for you, but we're going to get what we'll do a couple tours with you. But you can see it with people sometimes. It's like if you owned like a coffee shop and you hired some guy to like manage your coffee shop and you paid him pretty well, or gal, and they work for you for 6 months and they're making you all this money hand over fist. In your heart of hearts, well, it's only a matter of time before they figure out that they should own their own coffee shop. You know what I mean? They're not going to manage yours for the rest of your life.
100%. And that's kind of how, like I felt with Whit when Whit first came on. I think we got Whit. He was still in college. He was a kid, but he was a 20-year-old kid who's playing pedal steel better than most 40-year-olds. And so, you see that kind of stuff. And that's why looking back, I always say, like, I was lucky to keep him for, 8 years. The fact that, and that's just part of the business. When you surround yourself with wildly talented people, we're not going to be the Rolling Stones. We're probably not going to have the same band when we're in our 70s doing the victory lap, just reminiscing about the good old days. It's like, certain people rise to the very, very top, and some people, we might be the highest they ever get. And learning to accept that, learning to call it what it is and see it for what it is, I think is the true key to finding a little bit of sanity in this business.
I think if I'm still touring in my 70s, BJ, it's not going to be a victory lap. It's going to be more of like a shame lap through American legions.
a shame lap through the trenches.
Yeah, baby.
Oh man, I can't. Man, I'll be there right beside of you. We'll be doing the Tuscaloosa crawfish boil for the 4th straight year. Yeah. Bring on 2050, man.
I got a picture of you holding a picture of her taped to the dash of my car. I see it every time I check my speed or run up to the grocery store. The two of you are the only thing in life worth fighting for. But since you've been gone, I ain't been much for fighting anymore.
BJ and Company have a new album out today, May 1st, entitled Lamentations. It was recorded in Los Angeles and produced by Shooter Jennings. One of the high points of this new album is the single 6 Years Come September. It's a straightforward meditation on the sobriety that BJ has maintained for the last half decade or so. Let's take a listen.
I ain't had a drop to drink since the day that you left me. 6 years come September, I've been cursed with this clarity. I just stare in the mirror, yelling at a stranger looking back at me. And the ghost of the man I could have been still haunts all my dreams. These days things don't come easy. It's all I can do most just to keep it between the lines. If I'd have done a better job of listening, maybe you would still be mine.
The new album is entitled Lamentations, out on New West Records today and available everywhere music is sold or streamed.
I got a picture of you holding a picture of her taped to the dash of my car.
So the other big change for you since we last talked, you became a father, man. And I know, so I've known you for so long. You are, as I've said many times on this program, even on episodes of which you're not a part of, you're the hardest working guy I know out there on the road. You were for 10 to 15 years. You've scaled it back a little bit, which is still more than most people do, but you've scaled it back since becoming a father. Can you talk about becoming a dad and how that's had an effect, I would say principally on the way, I don't know, you and I talk a lot personally, and I can just tell as your friend that you've really made some huge changes as far as how you value different things, the hierarchy of what you value.
Yeah, getting started like most bands, we were pedal to the metal. We were play as many shows as you possibly can. So there was in 2010, 11, and 12, we crossed the 300 show a year threshold, which looking back is insanity. Like that's how you break up a band super quick. Fuck being an asshole. Put that aside. Making somebody play 300 shows, and I'm not talking about good shows. I'm talking about like shitty. Nobody showed up. We played for $50 in some beer shows. To go from that and to kind of watch it, the ultimate goal is to play less shows and still be able to make a living. And luckily for me, it kind of timed out really well because I finally got to the point in my career where I didn't have to play those 250 to 300 shows a year. I could pull back and only take the shows that really made sense. And that kind of coincided with me having a kid. Which I got lucky. Never in my life has anything coincided this perfectly. We did 92 shows. We did 92 shows in 2019, which is the first time the band's done less than 100 shows since 2005. So yes, I took a huge step back, but it's also, I don't look at it as I got to play 92 shows. I look at it like I got to be home 270 days that year. I got to be a dad, and I'm not talking about being home like most dads. Most dads are home on the weekends, and they get home at 5 o'clock, and they get to play their kid for a couple hours before bedtime. Like I get to be 270 days a year, like full-time dad. Like wake up at 7 with the kiddo, spend the whole day with her, put her to bed at 7:30. It's I value that, and that's a priority for me. And I'm very lucky that I didn't have to really give up. The dream, because I know plenty of guys who, they have their first kid in their early 20s and they're musicians, and you have to pick. And most of them are good human beings and they pick the right thing. They pick being a dad and they take that job that they might not love as much as music, but they realize that being a dad is more important than being a rock star. And I was very, very lucky that I got to, become a father at a point in my career where I could take a lot more time off the road and still be an effective musician and still run a business that takes care of my family and 5 other guys and their family, but also not at the, not losing anything with my family. You know, it's not a detriment me being on the road, because usually again, I can't say this enough, we're extremely fortunate, because now when I go on the road for those 90 days, I get to take my family with me. You know, we've since Things Change came out in 2018, we've been in a bus. And so, you know, me and the wife and the kid have the back of the bus, and the rest of the band has all the bunks. And it's just really great, because I'm finding this wonderful balance between dad and, you know, small business owner, slash, you know, singer-songwriter. And I couldn't have done this in my early 20s. There's no way. I could have been a proper father when I was trying to get a band off the ground.
No, there's absolutely no way. You and I had kids at a really similar age, and I think, you know, the part of that allows you to have your priorities in order there is, so luckily, you know, my kid's coming up on 4 years old now, and my business is still going strong, and that's awesome. But I waited to have him to a point where it was like, I knew in my heart of hearts, like, okay, well, if touring less and spending a little bit less time playing music is going to mean that I can't do this job anymore, I was so totally comfortable walking away at that point, because I'm like, man, you can never say I didn't give it the old college try. You know, I sure as hell did. Now, luckily, I haven't been confronted with that decision yet, but I really was at a point, and it sounds like you were at a point too, where it's just like, look, man, I've tried this. So if I can't do it anymore, I think if I'd had to make that decision when I was 24, just speaking for myself, I know there would have been some bitterness in my heart about that.
Oh, for sure. If I would have been the guy who always talked about, you know, playing for the state championship, man, if I hadn't thrown out my left knee, man, we'd have won states. I would have been the musical equivalent of that guy for the rest of my life. I'm like, man, I played the Lincoln Theater opening up for Steve Earle in 2008, and my whole life was ahead of me, and I could have been something. You know, that would have been me talking to everybody at the open mic night at the local Irish pub for the rest of my fucking life. But you know, like I said, now that, you know, Pearl, my daughter, will be 2. She just turned 2, actually. April 9th, she turned 2. If I'd have had her in my 20s, you know, I would have chose to be a dad. There'd been so much resentment and like this deep-rooted bitterness, like you were just talking about. So I'm happy that I get to, you know, have the proverbial cake and eat it too.
Yeah. And not to say that other people couldn't do that and not be bitter about it. I think that you and I are just particularly insane people. So,
yeah. Oh yeah. I thought that went without saying. I thought that was going to be like in the header for the podcast. It was just like, these are 2 insane people talking. Please don't think there's any rationale here.
Yeah. This is great. This is about as close to, one of the conversations we have when I'm about 3 beers deep at 9:30 at night that I've ever had on the podcast. So this is fantastic.
It's my favorite, because if my phone rings anywhere near 10 o'clock, which me and my wife go to bed extremely early, because we're old people at heart. You know, I'm in my mid-30s, and so is my wife, but we both have the mind and body and spirit of 90-year-old people.
Sure.
So we eat dinner at like 5 o'clock every night, and we're in the bed by 10. If my phone rings anywhere near 10 o'clock, my wife just says, "Go talk to Joe." she immediately knows it's going to be you. But yeah, that's my favorite thing about our conversations, because we usually just talk about the music business. And even as successful as both of us are in the music business, in the grand scheme of, you know, neither one of us are Tim McGraw, nor will we ever be. But we have both found ways to make a living and take care of our family by the things that we make up and write down on pieces of paper in our room. The fact that, you know, we're here and still being able to be family men absolutely blows my mind, because I know when I met you almost 15 years ago, to think that both of us would actually still be playing songs and being husbands and fathers at the capacity that we are absolutely shocks most people. I think that we could have bet a lot of money against ourselves and both retired and been millionaires.
Yeah, man. Yeah. If I had just gone into finance like I should have, well, look, tell me a little bit about this new record. I've been telling you for years. I think I'm going to go on record that I think You were still drinking when I was telling you this, so this must have been like 2012 or 13 or something like that. But I'd been telling you for years that I wanted to hear the American Aquarium LA record. I wanted to hear your Los Angeles record. So when you told me about a year or year and a half ago,
you told me that forever.
Yeah. So when you told me you were going in with Shooter Jennings to LA to make a record, needless to say, I was pretty hyped. Tell me about how that came together, and tell me about how that process differed from other processes that you've done.
Well, to be completely honest, originally we had set off to make this record in Memphis, Tennessee, and we had everything set up. We had the studio time booked, and then a couple weeks before we went into the session, the producer and their manager let us know that they had a gut feeling that it was a really not a good fit. They didn't want to make the record, so they pulled out of the project a couple weeks before we were set to make it, and this would have been September of 2019. And so for the listener out there that is not the creative, imagine having this tiny, fragile thing that you created in its infancy and you think it's really, really great, and then showing it to someone that you respect their opinion of and having them tell you, I don't believe in this thing that you created. There was an ego shot there. There was a self-doubt seed planted that over the course of a couple of weeks, I started questioning, like, maybe these songs aren't good enough. Maybe these songs aren't going to be the next record. Maybe I'm a little too far ahead. Maybe I need to pump the brakes and kind of reevaluate where the record's going. But my manager told me not to. My manager said, these are good songs. The songs that I sent the first producer was songs like Me and Mine and Day I Learned to Lie to You and How Wicked I Was, songs that are right now like the singles for the record. And I was down on myself. I was kind of, doubting the whole process. And my booking agent called me and said, hey, I heard you're looking for a producer. I said, yeah, we need a producer in the next month. And I don't think anybody worth their weight is going to not be booked right now. And he's like, well, let me check with Shooter. I was like, what? And he's like, I also book Shooter. So my booking agent is also Shooter Jennings' booking agent. And so he sent Shooter a message, sent him the 3 demos that I'd been shopping around to other producers. And Shooter texted me back a couple hours later and said, hey, man, it's Shooter. If nobody else has called you yet, I want to call dibs on this record. I want to make this record. And I said, man, we've got to have it made before the end of the year. And he said, how about you just come out here in December? And I was like, well, I really want to make this record in Memphis. That's kind of where, I wrote the record around the idea of making it in Memphis. And he's like, how about we make a Southern California record? And so, me and the boys packed up. We flew out to Southern California, holed up in Laurel Canyon. And every day we drove to North Hollywood and made the record. We were there for 8 days and cut this whole record in 8 days.
How does Shooter work that's different from other processes that you've done?
Man, Shooter, I'd heard a lot of stories about Shooter going in, all of them extremely positive. Kind of that he is this magical unicorn as far as a producer goes that asserts himself and lets you know what he thinks the record should sound like, but also is kind enough to the ego that is the artist ego, to where he nurtures you instead of pushes you back creatively. Mm-hmm. And so we went to the studio and we cut all the basic tracks were done in less than 4 days. We spent the last 4 days just kind of, hitting piano strings with mallets to see what they sounded like. The record was pretty much done in 4 days. Wow. And it's because Shooter he's amazing because you get in a room and he has a very, very clear idea of what he thinks the record should be. And he pushes you toward that idea, but he does so in such a creative way that you feel like you're figuring out yourself, even though he saw this thing the whole time. And it was really great because I've never made a record with zero ego. There's, everybody, pre-record pep talk. You're like, man, we're going to go into this thing. We're going to listen to everybody's ideas and it's going to be so copacetic and it's going to be awesome. And we're going to be friends and it's going to be great. And then you get in there day one and you're like, no, Johnny, we don't need another guitar solo that's 8 minutes long. With this, it was everybody kind of had this one goal. They saw the finish line for every song, and they knew exactly what we needed to do. And every single idea that got thrown out, we tried it. even if it was a bad idea, a good idea, we tried it just to see, and nobody got their feelings hurt. Everybody, there was like this never-ending well of creativity to where somebody would throw this idea out. We try it. If it didn't work, there was no recoil. There was no like, well, maybe I should think about the next idea before I throw it out. Yeah. It was just this continuous trying new stuff every single time until you got something really, really cool. It was amazing. I've never worked with anybody like Shooter. We knew going in, that Shooter was a pretty in-demand producer across the board. The Brandy Carlisle record was fantastic, the Tanya Tucker record. And when we made the record with him in December, he had just finished the Marilyn Manson record.
Oh, wow.
So that kind of puts in perspective, where he can kind of float in between just about any genre, and put his stamp on it. So he was finishing the mastering on that Marilyn Manson record right when we started our session.
Wow.
So it was kind of crazy to wrap your head around a guy who was that in demand in just about every genre of music. But he's like a music store nerd. And he's the guy from High Fidelity who sits back. He knows everything. He knows who played on what records. And he could have just played it safe. Growing up, he's got the pedigree. Two of his parents are two of the original four Outlaws. Like, he could have completely played it safe and just did some bullshit outlaw country thing for the rest of his life.
Right.
But he refused to do that. Like, he keeps pushing it. And that's what blows my mind, is that most people in that situation would have played it safe. And he said, fuck it. I'm going to go out and make a name for myself. I know every interview I've ever read about him, people say the same thing, but he was a seventh member of our band for 8 days. Like, he added so much to the record, but also kind of let us get there on our own, which is this kind of beautiful balance that you really need when you're making a record.
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what you said, that everyone felt comfortable to, bring whatever they had to the table, but not take it personally when it wasn't picked up. And I think, so that's what happened with my last record that I just made, and that was a first-time thing. And from my perspective, it was having a producer who was just completely 100% firmly in control. But who was not like throwing that in your face, like it wasn't coming from a place of like wanting to dominate everybody else. It was coming from a place of such utter and complete competence that everyone just has to recognize them and trust their decisions.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where, in this case, you're paying someone a good amount of money to be the guy that makes the call. You get to the fork in the road. Do we go left? Do we go right? There's no band vote on this. You're paying this guy based off of every decision he's made his entire life in his musical career. You're paying off of all of that knowledge for him to make the right decision on whether we go left or right. And it was really, really nice, because for the first time ever, this band just kept deferring to the producer and saying, both of these ideas are really great. Shooter, we trust you on this. And he would make the call. And listening back to the record, it's obvious that he made a lot of really, really great calls. Because I listened back to some of the acoustic demos, and I'm like, man, this song has really grown in a really, really great way based on, comparing it to what I wrote on my living room couch.
Yeah. I worked with a producer once, this guy, Brian Deck, and there was a keyboard player in doing a line in the booth, and halfway through the thing, Brian buzzed in and said, hey, you know what? I've decided that this thing isn't going to work. And the keyboard player said, yeah, but I'm just one take away from getting it, so why don't I just put it through for you, and that way you have it when it comes to mix time. And Brian just said, well, I'd rather make decisions, not more options. And I've always come back to that line. I think it's a great idea, and that sounds like the spirit with which Shooter was helping you guys make the record. He was helping you make decisions rather than creating options that people could get their feelings hurt about.
I love that. I'm gonna use that in the future. That's exactly what he did. And sometimes you just need the tiebreaker there. The metaphorical tiebreaker of saying, no, guys, I'm the producer of this record. My name's on the back of it. Yeah, I think this is what you should do. And like you said before, it doesn't come from an egotistical place. It doesn't come from a, hey, I'm in control, you have to listen to me, minion type place. It comes from a, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I think this is the right way to go. And just trusting that person, because, again, it's not like your buddy Tommy who's coming in and giving you his opinion. It's somebody who has won Grammys the last 2 years, and you're paying for that opinion. And so it blows my mind the people that pay money for these producers and then want to argue with them. And it's like they're here for a reason. Right. They've earned the right to make these decisions. And so in my experience, you should just get out of the way and let them make these decisions.
Totally. Well, you had a whole tour booked behind this record that was supposed to be starting like a week from now. Obviously, that's all been thrown into the air because of COVID. Talk to me a little bit about what it's like. You're releasing an album today as this episode is published, the 1st of May. Talk to me about what it's been like to have to scramble in the age of lockdown and coronavirus for something that you put so much time, energy, and money into.
Man, it's a really weird time to be releasing new music out into the world. There's no handbook for how to release a record in the middle of a global pandemic. But we're adapting. First and foremost, we knew that we didn't want to postpone the release. We could see because I think that was the option for a lot of bands, is do we stick to our normal release date, or do we punt until the fall and release a record then? And for me, our fans have been waiting. We announced this record in September. So for me to push them back any longer, I didn't think that was fair to the fans that have really been looking forward to May 1st, especially because the record was done and we didn't have any reason to push it back. Like, the vinyl manufacturers busted their ass and made sure our vinyl got delivered on time. So there was none of these kind of, situations that need to push a record back. Like, if we didn't have vinyl or something, maybe, but we had everything locked and loaded. And so we decided to put it out. I think now more than ever, people needed that distraction. People need, set off an hour of their life and get off of Instagram and go consume something artistically. And that was what we were hearing from our fan base. And so we're like, we're going to move straight ahead with it. And so we've, it's been all full steam ahead for this, this release today. And, it's a weird time because it hasn't really fully affected me, because we've been off the road since late January, and that was all planned. We weren't supposed to hit the road again until May 15th, and now we're starting to have to cancel dates, and we don't know really when the end is going to be. And even if certain states say the end is now, there's going to be the routing states that say that they're still under quarantine. So you can't really plan a tour right now. So we're kind of just sitting at home telling people, hey, we've got new music out, you should go listen to it. But people have really been relating to that. They've really been digging the record. We put out 4 singles, which I think is more singles than we've ever put out, leading into a record. And it's just to give people something to do in this kind of unplanned off time.
Right. Totally. Well, I think that's great, man. I'm so proud of you. I think it's a great record. I think it's the LA record that I always wanted to hear. And I'm so glad you jumped back on our show again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, Joe.
This week's show was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. American Aquarium's latest album, released today, is entitled Lamentations. Available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself. And for you, just keep your eye on the song.